Today I'm going to show you the technique behind making people float in your photos. We all know that camera trickery is nothing new. I mean, since the dawn of photography, people have been trying to fool one another with fancy illusions. I mean, just look at the moon landings. I mean, they're clearly fake. Well, don't mind me, I'll wait. You guys just argue that one out in the comments section. Well, seeing as we're on the topic of weightlessness, today I'm going to show you how to create this very simple but highly effective photography illusion, which makes it appear as if the person in your portrait is floating in mid-air. There are three main ways you can get this technique, and I'm going to cover all of them in this video, from taking the images to editing the final result in Photoshop afterwards. So kicking it all off is method number one, which is by far the easiest of the three. Essentially, all it involves is you asking your model to jump in the air and you taking a photo whilst they're in mid-air. That's it. That's the technique. You basically ask them to jump in the air and take a photo. I mean, obviously, sure, there are things that I can tell you to make it look more convincing. I mean, first of all, you can ask your model to wear loose or lightweight clothing. A floaty dress or an unbuttoned shirt which they can fling back as they jump will help convince the audience that the model is really being suspended in midair. Also, when your model jumps, ask them to arch their back, tilting their head back, and also extending their arms and legs outwards as much as they can. They'll look a hell of a lot more graceful if they do this, rather than just looking like a sack of potatoes if they hop up and down. If your model has long hair, ask them to fling their hair back as they jump. If you time it just right, you'll capture a shot when the hair is directed upwards, and it will just add that extra layer of believability. The final tip I can give you is to just make sure that you use a fast shutter speed. I try and aim for 1/500th of a second or faster, just to ensure that the movement of the model is frozen in place and not blurred. Or you can do what I did and use off-camera flash to freeze the movement, whichever you prefer. So for method number two, you're going to need some additional equipment to help you out on this one. You're going to need a step ladder and a tripod. So the first step in this method is to frame up your shot on the tripod, and then once you're happy with the composition, take a shot of the scene without anything in the frame. This image is really vital to the success of this shot, as we're going to use this blank frame later on in Photoshop to help us remove that ladder, so please do not forget to take it. Also, if you're like me and you like to shoot your images with a really shallow depth of field just to create that separation between your subject and the background, you'll also need to make sure that you lock the focus by switching your lens to manual focus. If you don't do this, you'll end up with a shot that's focused way off into the background, and then when you come to stitch the two shots together later on in Photoshop, it just will not look right. If it helps, you can always opt to take the photo of your model first, so you can get the composition right and get the focus locked in, and then just before you pack away, take the shot with nothing in the frame. Obviously, this option is a little bit more risky, because if you forget to take that vital frame at the end, then all of your hard work previous to that has just been wasted. It's also really important that you do not move the tripod as well. If you do, your photos won't match up, and it'll make the whole thing a lot harder to piece together later on. If you're really worried about knocking your camera whilst taking the photo, you can always use a shutter release cable, or you could use a mobile phone app to allow you to fire your camera remotely. This will just mean it will minimize the amount of times you need to touch your camera and reduce the risk of you accidentally knocking it. Now it's time to ask your model to climb up the ladder and position themselves so that it appears as if they're floating. Loose garments like the floaty dress our model Hannah is wearing makes this whole process a lot easier, as it allows us to cover up certain parts of the shot that you just don't want to be visible. For our shot, we decided to ask Hannah to turn side on to the camera, and then that allowed her to use her right leg, which was furthest away from the camera, to kneel on one of the steps. This meant that she could put all of her weight on the back leg and free up her arms and her other leg to pose for the shot. Her long dress obviously helped to hide all of this and create a really convincing result. What you don't want to do though is have your model so that they're stood flat-footed on the step, because once the ladder's been taken away in Photoshop, it will be super obvious. Now, before I move on too far ahead and show you how I edited this final image in Photoshop, I'm going to show you the third and final method, as it's very similar to this one and uses the same editing techniques. The only real difference with this next technique is that instead of using a ladder, we use some chairs to allow Hannah to lie down on her stomach and create an image that appears as if she's hovering just above the ground. As you can see, Hannah is resting all of her weight on her stomach muscles and then gently resting her feet on the chair in the background, just to give her a bit more balance. Now, the main advantage of this method over the previous one is that because Hannah is less reliant on her balance, she was able to fling her head back just like we did in the first shot, so that we can get a much more convincing result. It's really important to make sure that once your model is roughly in position, take a test shot and make sure that there aren't any parts of the clothing that are tucked up or look unnatural, because if she was really floating in midair, there wouldn't be any flat edges to the clothing at all. So make sure you allow the fabric to fall naturally to the side over the side of the chair. Okay, so now is the time to finally perform the Photoshop magic and piece all of these images together. First of all, I took some time in Lightroom just to pick out the shots I wanted to edit. Remember, you're going to need 2 shots to make this work. You're going to need 1 photo with the model in the frame and 1 with just the empty scene. I started out by doing some basic color work in Lightroom first. Then once I was happy that both of my images were consistent in terms of brightness and contrast, I exported them as separate layers within Photoshop. To do this, I first selected them both at the bottom by simply holding down Shift and clicking on them. Then I went up to Photo, Edit in, Open as layers in Photoshop. As you can see, this will open the images as separate layers within a new Photoshop file. All you need to do then is make sure that you have the blank background image at the bottom of the layers palette. If you need to, just click and drag to move it. Now grab the polygonal lasso tool from the toolbox on the left hand side and make sure that the feather is set to 1 pixel. If you don't do this, your cutout will have a super hard edge and it just won't look right. Now it's just a case of selecting around the edge of your model. Take your time and work all the way around the edge. When you get around to your model's hair, you don't need to worry about being too accurate. Just make a really wide selection around them and carry on being accurate when you get to the other side near the ladder. Once you've made your selection, head down to the bottom of the layers palette and click Add Vector Mask. This will mask out the background but keep your model visible. If, like me, you have areas inside of your selection that you've missed and you can still see the ladder, then you can fix this by first making sure that you have the layer mask highlighted within the layers palette just by clicking on it. Then grab the brush tool and make sure that the foreground color is set to pure black. Now you can just brush over the parts of the ladder you want to mask out. If you make a mistake, just hit Ctrl and Z or Command and Z if you're using a Mac to go back a step and try again. Once you have the brush tool selected, you'll also probably need to soften the mask at the very top where we took that really broad selection around the hair. All you need to do here is just carefully brush along that hard edge to blend it all together. And that's it, that's all there is to it. The third method I showed you where we used the chairs instead of the ladder is edited in exactly the same way. As a final tip, don't be afraid to get creative with this. You don't have to levitate just one person. Try levitating different objects, try using multiple people. If you need some inspiration, then why not check out the video here where I use the same kind of trick to make it appear as if my camera is bouncing on my finger like a basketball. If you're new to the channel and you like this video, then why not subscribe, because I create new content just like this every single week. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So the first step in this method is to... F*** you.